Hello, this is Game Critic with another episode of Game Framework, a series about the different design aspects of video games that, when executed well, make for truly great experiences. This episode is about spaces and level design. The game space is not just based on how the level is laid out. Game spaces are a virtual space in which the player explores and interacts with the game mechanics. Space is the culmination of all the aspects of game design, from the AI to the sound design to the actual level design. In a sense, the level design is the stage for the aesthetics, which is something I'll talk about in a later video. The true art in making a game space is creating a believable environment for the player. That doesn't mean that the game has to be realistic, rather that the parts of the game must all come together to create a whole that makes playing the game feel like you've stepped into an entirely new world. So, to produce a space that creates good atmosphere for the player, the game's developers must attempt to fool their senses. With mainly only access to two senses, the player's eyes and ears, the sound design, level design, AI design, etc. must all combine naturally. This is very important when it comes to immersing the player in a world, as believability and persuading the player of what they're seeing is key to a great game experience. Anything out of the ordinary can cause issues for the player's belief in the world, and this does not only include things like bugs, but also extends to different aspects of the environment not lining up to create an interconnecting atmosphere. For example, odd sound design choices or an out-of-place soundtrack can destroy a meticulously designed level. An AI that takes unintuitive actions can spoil the player's ability to believe that the NPC is actually an intelligent creature. A game that is a good example for what the quality level of atmosphere you should expect to experience in a game is What Remains of Edith Finch. Here is the opening section of the game.
I lived here until I was 11, but I wasn't allowed inside half the rooms. I hadn't been back since my brother Lewis's funeral.
The sound design immediately lets you know that you're in a forest, and the game has a well-designed environment which is pleasing to the eye. When playing games, you enter a sort of trance known as flow or the zone, and you can find yourself getting drawn into the story or action of the game. The persuasion of the space is far more effective when a game is designed like this, as it is far easier to get lost in the game when you don't feel keenly aware that you are playing a game due to odd design choices or bad ones. Level design also goes beyond just the creation of a map, but also delves into how the player traverses the space. Many developers seem to struggle to lead players through their levels, requiring the use of minimaps or other methods for locating yourself in the game. Some techniques developers have been using for years are psychological tricks. They're to guide the player through the space in their games in a way that's easy to follow, and isn't always immediately obvious to the player. Some games use visual cues and tricks to guide the player's eye, some of which are borrowed from art, such as light sources, which are used in dark environments to draw the player to the next area, motion, which is used in static scenes, and guiding lines, in which certain objects in the scene point the way to go. Sound is often found being used as a tool in games, and the sound of characters talking and the creaking or flapping of a door can help point the player in the right direction, often giving the player some idea of what they will find around the corner.
That's since he was chasing down small trinkets all over India.
The main path in the game space must always be the most noticeable thing in the scene. Brightness and colours can be used to emphasise the main path, by carefully moderating the colours and lighting in the space. Uncharted 4, Mirror's Edge, and Doom 2016 all use this way of helping players navigate through their worlds, using colours like yellow, green, or red to emphasise the critical path. Floating map markers and compass markers have become a staple in many open world games, and are used to lead the player around the map, pointing them constantly in the right direction, removing any likelihood of getting lost. The Witcher 3, a game lauded of having such an immersive and amazing atmosphere, has this immersion completely broken when you are forced as Geralt to not only follow down highlighted pathways, but also, as a result of the horse you ride being designed to follow these pathways automatically, you will only have to momentarily engage your brain to choose the appropriate direction on a fork in the road. I think this is a really boring way to deal with traversal, and even though making games with an optional experience like this for people who want a more casual session is great, the more people playing these great stories the better. There should also be a mode for the people who want a little bit more adventure, like in the Thief games, where you started off with an incomplete map for each level, or the maps you can find in Skyrim, which lead you to some treasure after you discover what location the map was leading you to. Perhaps even a completely different system could be created, one that uses landmarks placed around the world, similar to the weenies used in the Uncharted games, landmarks scattered around the map used to orientate the player in the space. These could be used as a way to get directions from characters in the game, the characters using these individual and distinctive landmarks that can be seen from very far distances as starting points to lead the player to the quests they are giving them. Spaces can also be used to tell a story or a narrative, either with the environment or the use of mechanics in the environment. In What Remains of Edith Finch, certain parts of the space trigger dialogue, developing the narrative. Certain levels within the game also use the mechanics to tell the story, such as in this example, where the animals each have different methods of control. They are very easy to use, and are an interesting way of leading the player through the narrative and world, creating a solid thematic link between the player and the story of the game world. A method of telling the story with props in a scene is called mise en scene, and is used to great effect by some developers, using the level design of the game to tell you a lot about the game's setting and story, mostly through objects placed around the level that can give you little narrative clues. The developers of BioShock are amazing at this, showing absolutely everything the player needs to know about the environment and story just by looking at it. Take this example, where you are shown immediately that the building you are in is either set or has failed to move on from the early 1900s, judging by the Art Deco architecture, is submerged underwater, and, judging by its occupants and shops, doing quite well for itself. I think this is a great way to show players the actual story of the world through what is placed in it and how it looks, because although many games try to portray narrative through their design, if it isn't done frequently or well enough, the player may not even notice that it's there. Game spaces are so important to our experience of a game, because they are not just a platform for the rest of the game, a space is the game. A well-designed space is integral to player enjoyment and the immersion in its world and story. Level design, when done well, can remove the need for players to be led through games in artificial ways, and can give the player a better sense of accomplishment as they overcome the challenge without feeling they were told what to do. Persuading players is the most important task of the game designer, and spaces are the biggest way in which they can do that. What Remains of Edith Finch contains my favourite examples on how to make a game space truly immersive and persuasive, and I haven't felt this taken in by a story in a game in a long time. If there was a game that you felt created a great atmosphere that drew you in, type it in the comments. I would really like to hear about how the atmosphere immersed you in its world. Thanks for watching this video about levels design and spaces. I hope you learned something about what cool stuff games are made of, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.